Hi everyone, welcome to this one-hour webinar entitled Onyx Vegetation. My name is Brian Smith and I will be the instructor for this presentation, which is being hosted by CGschool. For more information, for more classes, free training, and numerous free resources, please visit thecgschool.com. This is a live presentation and we only have 1 hour, so I can't take questions during the presentation. At the conclusion of the presentation, I will be available for about 15 minutes if anyone has any questions at that time at the conclusion. This presentation is applicable to beginner to intermediate level users of Onyx. I will cover some very basic material at first and then move faster and faster into more intermediate level materials. So if you haven't been working in Onyx on a regular basis for several years, you will get something out of this. We only have enough time to scratch the surface of all the great things Onyx has to offer. So let's jump right into the discussion. And here is the agenda. We're going to start by talking about standard interface elements that are common to each of the different modelers. We will look at bamboo, flower, and grass modelers to see some of the unique features found only on those programs. And then we'll cover Onyx to Max, spend a few minutes on Storm, and then we'll finish with a look at some of the things you should know about how materials work with Onyx. Again, this is just scratching the surface. This is to introduce you to some of the things you perhaps don't know, even if you've been using this for several years. Hopefully you can get something out of this. At this time, the Onyx line of software consists of 6 modeler programs, which you can see here: bamboo, broadleaf, conifer, flower, grass, and palm. Each of these programs run independently outside of 3ds Max or any other software you're going to be using. I'm going to be demonstrating Onyx with 3ds Max, but almost everything I discuss will be applicable to your work regardless of which 3D software you use. Notice also that there are these PER files along with the modelers. These are simply the custom registration files that are required for you to use the modelers. Notice also that I have a folder here called Libraries. If I go into this, you will see something unique. This is when you first receive your Onyx files and folders, they won't look like this. I've set up this in a custom way that I believe is more user-friendly and allows quicker access to the modelers and libraries. If you purchase the entire collection of Onyx software, which you can see right here, this is the Onyx Garden Super Bundle. If you purchase the entire collection, which includes Tree Storm and the Garden Suite, which is comprised of all the different modelers as well as Onyx to Max. If you purchase all that, you will not see your files and folders as I'm displaying them here. I've created this in a way that is more user-friendly for me, and I've also done something else. I've also removed a lot of the files that I simply don't need. A lot of the registration files, a lot of the installation files, and a lot of files that simply are not I know I'm never going to use again. If I go into this shortcut, this is what it would look like normally when you first purchase the entire bundle. You have Tree Storm here and you have Onyx Garden Suite. All these different modelers are broken up or are comprised of numerous different folders, including a library folder, PDFs for the registration. And if I go into Broadleaf, for example, you see things like Fantastic Trees. And this contains a lot of things that I know I'll never use. So I've just simply deleted several of these style of trees or style of vegetation that I will never need. And everything that I work with in Onyx is now in this one clean, easy to access folder structure. So I have my bamboo, broadleaf, conifer, flower, grass, and palm all right here. And in each one of these, I have nothing more than bitmaps that show preview of the vegetation along with the file that I need to work with. So you can set up your folders that way if you like, and it will help, I believe, creating the get you going. And with that, let's get going on modeling. Let's talk about modeling. I'm going to open up 3 different modelers. I have here Onyx Tree Broadleaf, Onyx Tree Conifer, and Onyx Palm. I've opened up these 3 because I wanted to show that they are, for the most part, the same interface. There are 6 modelers. These 3 are nearly identical in what they contain. Some of the other modelers, for example, the grass and flower, they're going to be significantly different, so I'm going to talk about those separately. But I want to start by talking about settings that are general to each of these. Bamboo is very similar to these 3, but it has a few unique features. But for the most part, we're going to start just by talking about these 3 modelers. So I'm going to go ahead and close 2 of these and just look at Onyx tree broadleaf. So what we have here is we have a workspace. This is a preview pane that shows the trees if we had a tree loaded. We don't have a tree loaded, so I'm going to start by loading a tree. I'm going to go to File, Load Parameters, and I'm already in the broadleaf folder. I want to go to a file called this will be fine, Populus alba. Open it up. There is my Populus alba. Let's start just by talking about a couple things here at the bottom. We have preview icons for different parts of the tree. We have letters that indicate different parts. For example, TR indicates trunk. If I want to display the trunk, I have to highlight that. It is highlighted by default. I can turn that off and not display it. BG represents bough, so if I want to turn off the bough of the tree, which is coming right out of the trunk, I can turn that off. If I want to turn on and off the first, second, and third level of branches, I can do that here. And that just simply might, I might want to do that to have more or less detail. If I want to have twigs, stems, and fronds, I can turn on and off those as I see fit. Whatever I see displayed here is what is going to get used inside your 3D software, exported when you do the export into the 3D software. So I want to make sure I have the appropriate level of detail that I see here. You can display your tree in a number of different ways. You can display it in wireframe mode. You can display it in you can display it in linear mode, which is basically just lines or polylines. If I zoom in nice and close, you'll see everything is just nothing but lines. I can look at this in wireframe mode. I can look at this in shaded mode. I can have the benefit of seeing what it looks like with a little bit of sunlight and a little bit of shadow. And if I zoom out and rotate around, I can see the effect of having this shadow and sunlight applied. I can also use this really cool feature called canopy mode, which allows me to, if I turn off all the different levels of this tree and stick with just the trunk and the canopy of the tree, I'm able to export this into my 3D software and use this almost as a massing model, almost for the benefit of just having a preview to set up an animation or have some sort of display that is not necessarily realistic but gives you an idea of the mass of the tree. So don't forget about using this in some cases. To the right of all these, you see a few other icons. There is a zoom in and zoom out feature. The zoom in feature is highlighted when you highlight this magnifying glass. To zoom out, you simply have to hold down Control and click on the screen. So to zoom in, click while you see that plus sign, hold down the Control button, and you'll see the minus. Click again, and you'll be zooming out. You can pan around, but you can't pan around while you are zoomed in to a zoom factor of 1. You would have to be zoomed in at least more than once to use the pan feature. So I'm going to zoom back out. There we go. And I'm going to go out of this canopy mode back into shaded mode without sunlight and without shadows, so I can see the tree just in shaded mode. You also have a really cool feature that allows you to trim the trees quite nicely. This saw icon is very interesting. I should probably turn off the foliage and turn on all the elements of the tree that I want to actually use. For example, the bough, branches 1 and 2, or branch level 1 and 2. And I can zoom in here and do some really cool manipulation of this tree. I can cut little bits and pieces off of this tree as I see fit. Now if I apply a cut across an entire section, it will not cut the entire section. I literally have to do each piece one at a time, which may or may not be something that you like, but that's the way it is. And if you keep cutting, you'll eventually find the part of the tree that you want to cut. Now I'm looking at this particular tree in one particular view. I'm looking at this, according to this azimuth here, from a view of 329 degrees and an elevation of 28. I can change that by moving around using my default icon, which is only available when you do not have the zoom or the pan feature enabled. So by default, you have these arrows that allow you to move around left and right or up and down. If you want to do both at the same time, if you want to move along both the X and Y axis at the same, and all three axes at the same time, you can hold down the control button and manipulate the view in this way. Notice when I do this, I do not see the tree, I just see a bounding box. I can see a tree the entire time if I choose from the special menu continuous update. When I do that, now notice I can turn my tree around and see it in full preview shaded mode at all times. And if ever there is an issue with the display, for whatever reason, if your display does not refresh properly, you can always use this DNA button. It's called the DNA button, but it's the refresh button. If you click this, it simply refreshes your display. If you notice when I closed this modeler program and reopened it, notice how my display went away. The tree is still there, but for display purposes, it just didn't get regenerated, so I can use the DNA button to refresh that display. So for the most part, all of these icons down here are simply to control the display of the tree, but just remember that whatever displays you show or whatever elements of the tree or vegetation you show, that is what is going to get imported, or I should say exported out of this modeler into whatever 3D software you're using. At the bottom of this interface, you see these what looks like animation buttons, and they are, for the most part. I want to set this mode to linear so I can see this animation a little bit better. What the purpose of these are is to show you what this tree would look like if blowing in the wind. One of the things that we'll see towards the end of the class is Onyx Tree Storm, which enables you to apply animation to your vegetation. And if you want to see a preview of that and see what it looks like, you can activate this wind button, click on the wind parameters icon, and set your speed, set your wind speed right here just by clicking and dragging to whatever speed you want. And I want to set this to be something like 20 kilometers per hour. I can have gusts, so if I want to see what it looks like with a big gust of wind once in a while, I can adjust this and make the gust go up to, say, 31 kilometers per hour. I can click OK. Now notice that the tree doesn't display. I have to regenerate it. And if I want to have the play rate of this be set to a certain amount, I can use the custom button, which allows me to type in a specific speed to use for a display, or I can use these default 24, 25, 30 frames per second and see the display in that way. You won't see this properly because it's being broadcast live over a webinar. On my screen, you would see the tree blowing in the wind fairly nicely, but I should mention that the amount of blowing is going to be dependent on the number of objects that you have displayed in your preview pane. So if you're finding that you can't actually refresh 30 frames per second, you can drop down the elements that you display to something lower temporarily, just so you can see the tree blowing in the wind a little bit better. And that's too fast. Let's activate this branch level 1, play it one more time. And it just gives me a fairly decent idea of how this would be blowing in the wind. And that's really all it's meant to be for. Let's close, or let's leave this broadleaf modeler and go into Onyx Palm. I want to load a coconut palm, which is a great type of plant to use to demonstrate the next portion of this demonstration, which is the modeling features of this modeler program. Remember, this whole interface is a modeler program, so if you're not here to do modeling, you're probably not doing what the program was intended for in the first place. So I have a coconut palm here. Over on the right hand side I have a trunk icon, a canopy icon, or I'm sorry, a stem icon, and I have a leaf icon. And you can get an idea of what each of these icons represents by the name that is shown in the parameters above. If I were to go into the conifer, for example, notice that I have 4 levels. I have 4 as opposed to 3. The first level would be the trunk. Second would be branches or twigs. This one here, actually it looks like this is the bough, branches, trunk, and needles. So each of these modelers have a slightly different setup based on the type of tree that you're using. I'm using the palm here. I want to manipulate the trunk of the palm. So I click on the trunk icon, and I have all these different options here. If you have an icon that has a quote, it simply means that you have to click twice to see anything to actually activate or use that particular feature. So notice here, trunk twist. If I want to apply some twist, I have to click twice to get it to actually do something. I want to adjust the trunk curving, so I click on trunk curving, and I automatically see this rollout appear. This is a little confusing at first, but you should be able to understand once I play around with it. I want to change the curvature of this palm tree. You don't see it, but if I click right here at the very top and drag down, you will see a red space appear, which simply means that there are 3 sections of this tree or tree trunk that I can manipulate: the bottom, middle, and top section. So when you open up these different windows and look at these parameters, there might be some hidden features that you're not familiar with. So you simply have to experiment and play around with this to get in and understand what's going on. Notice, for example, if I want to apply some bending of the bottom part of this tree, I can do that just by changing the, notice that the display sometimes is changes for the worse, but regardless, I can change the bending of this tree however much I want. And if I want to make that bottom section go higher up the trunk, I can just simply drag this bottom or bright green section so that it comprises, as you see here, 66% of the trunk length. Now, for that bottom 66% of the trunk length, I want it to curve a little bit. So there's my curve. Now let's say I want the top part of this tree to bend back the opposite way. Well, notice that there's a plus sign here indicating a 72% bend to the bottom part of this trunk. If I want to bend this the opposite way, I click this plus sign so that it's negative. Now I want to apply a negative bend in the opposite direction like I'm doing here. So I want to make it go 180 degrees the opposite direction. And let's make this bottom part of the trunk a little bit less and the middle a little bit bigger. So there we go. And now if I want the top part of this tree to bend the opposite direction, I change this symbol to the plus sign and make it bend, let's say 90 degrees or something like that, the opposite direction. So I get something like this. So needless to say, there's a lot of unique things you can do. This is just one element. This is just the trunk curving. If I want to manipulate, for example, the polygons that make up the trunk, I can manipulate the trunk, let's say the resolution and the curving resolution and the trans resolution, which simply changes the number of polygons that I have going around my trunk. So if I want to have only 3 polygons making up the 360-degree revolution of the tree, I can change it to 3 sides here. If I want it to be more detailed, I can increase this resolution here up to 32 sides. That would be a high polygon tree, so I don't really want to do that here. I could also have the curving resolution be greater to allow for more polygons along the length of the trunk if it's necessary for that bend. Okay, so that's just some basic modeling principles behind this. I'm going to zoom out all the way. And let's say, for example, that I want to, instead of importing this as a 3D tree, which I'm going to do shortly, as opposed to doing that, what if I just want to have a crisscross image that I can use in the background of my scene and have it match the 3D models, but have it be a very low polygon tree, specifically 2 polygons crisscross with an image of this tree on the planes that make up that crisscross. How do I do that? Well, I can export this as a bitmap through the File, Save Image as Bitmap type, but one thing to remember is that the color that you have here in the background is going to be the color that you see in your bitmap. And if you don't want to have some odd colors appearing on the fringe of your vegetation, especially in the case of your leaves, really thin parts of the tree, if you don't want to have some odd colors appearing like the blue background, you have to change the background color to account for that. For example, if I change this to woodland green, now the odds of having some blue artifacts appear around the edge of my frond are going to be much less. So if I go to File, Save As, I could save it as a bitmap, but I want to save it as a TGA file so I can also save the alpha channel, because with the alpha channel I can cut out this green background. So I want to save as a TGA, and it specifies my height here. I don't need to change my height. All I really am concerned about is the pixel size of this image. I want to have an image that's substantial enough to use for trees. I just want to set this to 1000, and the resolution or the aspect ratio is locked. So if I set one size to 1000, I can also change the resolution here if I want. That doesn't really matter to me. All I'm concerned about is the number of pixels that make up this tree. I can also turn on anti-aliasing, which will help the appearance of the leaves against the background so that there's a little bit more of a blending. And I can and should enable the alpha channel so that I can have the background cut out. So if I save this as coconut palm right here on my desktop, there it is. I can open up with Photoshop, and I will be able to see this tree with a alpha channel that I can now do something with. So with this tree, I can go to Channels. There's my alpha channel. Basically, I can just use this now, apply this image to a plane or 2 crisscross planes within Max, so I can have this in the background and then export my real tree, my 3D tree, into Max and use that in the foreground. So how do we export this? What do we actually do with this now? Well, let's go to the File menu. Here in the File menu, you see several different ways to save this object. You can save it in a number of different file types that have been around for many years. The 3ds file type is probably the most common, and that is usable in pretty much any 3D software. You can save this as an Onyx 3D file, which I'll get into in just a minute. I want to save this as a 3ds file. When I do, I see this menu appear, which allows me, and this would appear in any type of vegetation that you try to save. The only difference would be the actual elements that appear. So in flowers, for example, if I tried to save a flower, it won't have a trunk, so it'll have something else. This C stands for complex. PL stands for polygon. If I wanted to have a trunk that was made up of multiple polygons, basically all the polygons that I created in my modeler, I would leave this set to complex. If I wanted to save a lot of polygons, I can use this polygon option. I can click here for PL. Before I do, let's check the count of this tree. This tree has a polygon count of 101,402 polygons. If I wanted to cut this down and make it a little bit less, I could use this minimize button, which will make basically optimize the tree. Before I do that, I want to show you this feature here, the polygon count, or the polygon feature for the trunk. Notice I have 6,800 polygons right now, 6,832. If I click this, notice that it goes down to 176. So now my tree, instead of being made up of 6,800 polygons just for the trunk, is made up of 176 polygons, which therefore makes it much easier to render and much easier to work with in Max. Again, I could just hit this minimize button, which will optimize the entire tree for lower resolution. I say lower, but it's still very good for most cases, except when you're extremely close to the tree. So I recommend using this minimize feature as much as you can, except when you're very close to the tree. So now, instead of over 100,000 faces, I only have 31,800 faces. It's also important to set the units correctly here for whatever scene I'm working in. If your Max scene or whatever software you're using is set to meters, for example, you need to set this to meters, because if you didn't, if you had it set to centimeters, 1 meter in Max would translate to 1 meter in 1 centimeter in Onyx. So instead of a tree being 3 meters tall, it would be 3 centimeters tall when brought into Max. So make sure that you set this properly, and then you can save it. A message appears asking you or telling you not to sell or give this away. Said yes. I can save this to my desktop, and then I have this 3ds file that I can then bring inside Max. I want to open up Max, go into import. Since it's a 3ds file, I have to import it. There it is. It asks me if I want to merge. Yes, I want to merge. And there is my file inside Max. So fairly decent looking tree. Now this is, if I just render this, you'll notice that this is just a scanline image. There are no unique materials applied to this tree. Your tree is your vegetation is only going to look as good as the materials and lighting that you have applied. This is not a class on either. I will talk briefly about materials towards the end, but this is not meant to show you how to create beautiful vegetation through the use of intricate lighting or materials. So for the most part, this is a demonstration of what I wanted to show at this point. Having talked about the first 3 modelers, the onyx tree, conifer, palm, and broadleaf, let's get out of these. Again, these are fairly similar. I didn't talk about the conifer, but it is extremely similar to the others. Let's get out of this and let's go into one that's slightly unique, and that is the bamboo. So I go into bamboo. It takes a second to open up. Notice that it's nearly identical. The only thing that's different is this feature down here, which is a growth feature that allows you to create a series of images from the birth of the tree through the entire life cycle of the tree. If I go to File, Load Parameters, and pick a specific type of bamboo, doesn't really matter what I pick. There's a bamboo type. Notice that it automatically, if I import this, it will give me a certain number of years, months, days, hours, and minutes for the life cycle of this tree. If I click this icon, it allows me to go to the beginning of the life cycle. Notice that there's nothing to display because the tree hasn't even been born yet, because we are at the 0 year, month, and day of this tree. But if I were to click forward 1 frame at a time, notice that it's changing 1 month at a time, and I can see this bamboo growing month by month, and I can hit play to see how it evolves over time. And different bamboo, depending on the type of bamboo that you select, different bamboo is going to have a different life cycle. Some bamboo takes 10 years to mature, others takes just less than 1 year to mature. So that is the only significant difference here in this bamboo feature, besides one more feature here on the right hand side, which is this area feature. This simply allows you to have a whole section or a whole area of bamboo instead of just having one stalk like you see right now. So if I wanted to have a whole section of bamboo, I could enable this icon, which basically represents the area that you want. You see a length and width. Right now it's currently set to 45 centimeters length, 45 centimeters width. If I wanted to change that, it should be giving me an area, but I guess we haven't exceeded that yet. Yeah, we simply haven't exceeded that, but a different type of bamboo might exceed that. If I change this bamboo, let's try a different length and width here. And I'm not sure why that's not adjusting, but it should be giving me a much larger area of bamboo. This same feature is going to be seen in a couple of the other models that we're going to look at, so I will divert this until we get to one of the other modelers. But for the most part, this bamboo modeler is identical to the first three modelers that we have looked at. So I will close this. Now let's look at the grass modeler. I'm going to open up the grass modeler. This is Onyx Grass 2.0. So it's a second generation grass modeler. Notice first of all how much bigger it is. It's much bigger because there's simply a lot more going on here. I have a black preview screen because I haven't loaded anything yet. So I want to go to File, Open Grass, and I will just pick one of these grass elements here. Doesn't matter which. Instead of seeing the DNA button, now I see this paintbrush symbol, which is basically the same thing. It's a regeneration. It says, if I put my cursor over it, notice over here on the left-hand side, you didn't see it in the other modelers, but you do see it now in this grass modeler. It says Draw, press to activate modeling and rendering. So it's simply to refresh the display of this. So basically, it does the same thing. But everything here in this grass modeler has a description for the icon that you put your cursor over. I still have the same display or viewport navigation tools that I have in the others. I can manipulate the view or perspective. I can, like before, I can change the rotation so that I can see continuous update no matter how much I turn. Now this particular modeler has a lot of icons or labels that you might not be familiar with, which is why it's a good idea to keep handy this grass parts diagram, which will come with the modeler, this grass modeler, and this diagram allows you to see what each different element represents. So for example, if I want to manipulate the culm of this grass, I need to use the CU icon, which it's labeled here, but looking at this icon, you might not actually know what this represents until you look at one of these diagrams. And there's four diagrams in here that show what the different parts of these different types of grass are. Some grass have different parts than others. So keep those diagrams handy. So I have this particular grass loaded up here. I see all these different elements again, which I can turn on and off just like before. And these are the default options. If you want to have a little bit more detail, you can enable things like the floret or the on. For the most part, the default options work great and give you all the detail you should need. If you get really close to your grass and you want to see something more detailed, you can turn on the florets and other details. But for the most part, this works just fine. Notice that this says show grass cover. So this just basically turns on and off the ability to see one or the entire spread of grass here. So notice that this grass is circular in form. There's a circular amount of grass. How do we change that? Well, over here on the right-hand side, you see an icon which on the left says grass cover parameters, defines the area populated with grass. This is a very cool feature here. If you click on this, you will see this icon here up at the top that says grass cover form. And this allows me to change the structure of the grass, how the grass is grown, or the area that the grass is featured. So if I change the view, let's look at this from a little more top view, I can see that I can change exactly how this grass appears. And all these parameters let me change the size and complexity of this shape. I can use these default shapes, or I can use, probably what's most beneficial is this icon on the far right, which allows me to import a particular surface. So I want to do that right now. I want to import a particular surface that I create. I want to reset max. I'm going into max, and I want to reset this. And this is a new feature new to Grass 2.0. So if you don't have Grass 2.0, if you're using an older Grass modeler like Grass 1.0, you're not going to see this ability to import models from a different software. As a demonstration, I'm going to create a plane that is 100 by 100. I don't have any units defined. It's just 100 by 100, which is fine for what I'm doing here. Let's change the color of this to something other than what it is now, something easier to see, a blue color. And let's make this 40 segments and 40 length and width segments. And let's add the noise modifier to this because I want to get a little bit of distortion to this terrain. So this is a 100 by 100 plane. I want to have the Z displacement or strength be pushed up 10. And I have to change the scale down significantly to get it to show properly. Let's put it around 20. So here is my terrain. This is my terrain. It could be really any size. I've defined it as 100 by 100. But this is the terrain that I want to have grass growing on. And I can have any shape that I want. It just has to be a continuous closed shape. I shouldn't say continuous and closed. It just needs to be one solid shape like this. It can't be two broken elements. I can't have this split into two, and I can't do a lot of the crazy things that you might think. So it needs to be one basically solid object like this. In order to have the Onyx Grass program receive it, I have to export it as a particular type of model. I have to export this as a object file. I have to save it as a OBJ file type. So I need to go to the select file to export, and I need to select the object exporter type. I want to save this right to my desktop, and I want to call this terrain. This is very important here. By default, this option for faces will not be set to triangles. It will be set to quads. It was set to triangles for me because that's what I last used. It will be set to quads by default. You cannot use quads in Onyx Grass. It has to have triangles to populate the grass, to populate the terrain. So you have to make sure this is set to triangles. Also, this flip YZ axis option is enabled by default. It wasn't enabled for me because I had disabled it in the last use. I have to disable this here or inside the Onyx Grass modeler, which you'll see in just a minute. By default, this is enabled here. If you could leave this enabled, but you have to, when you go into the grass feature, disable that same feature inside grass. You'll see what I mean in a minute, but just for simplicity purposes, it's just a good idea to turn this off. This is simply because the XYZ axis in Onyx is not oriented the same way as it is in Max. In Max, the Z-axis is pointed upwards. In Onyx, the Z-axis is pointed towards the camera or towards you. So this flip YZ axis has to be disabled. I'm going to set the scale. I'm going to leave the scale set to 1. Everything else is fine. The only thing I have to make sure I do is turn this off and set this to triangles. I can click export. It tells me the number of triangles that get exported. Now I can actually bring this inside Onyx Grass. I can go to, I'm inside Onyx Grass, but I'm also inside this grass cover form. So this is where I want to import that OBJ file, the OBJ surface. Remember, it has to be OBJ. So I click on Import. I go to the terrain object, select Open, And this is very important that you set the units correctly, because if you don't, the units that you specify in max will not translate properly. So inside max, I set it to 100 by 100. Let's set that to inches. And let's here is that swap YZ option that I said you had to disable inside max. If you didn't disable it in max, then you would have to disable it here. Regardless, just make sure that you understand that if you ever see your terrain that you import turned 90 degrees, it's because you either have this switch enabled here or inside max. So just be aware of that. This is on by default. Okay, and I select import. There it is. There's my terrain. And I'm going to use the, sometimes it's hard to manipulate the view of this, but I'm going to hold down Control as I'm turning my cursor around. And as you see, what's going on right now is the terrain is being populated with this grass. Now this is going to be an enormous amount of polygons, enormous amount of grass. This is probably not the type of grass that I want to use for this. So let's try something else. Let's stop this, which I could have done if I had hit this paintbrush icon down here instead of trying to just cancel it any other way. So I cancel this. Let's open up a different type of grass, and one of the really cool types of grass inside this feature is grass covered true. There's multiple different types of grass covered true. This is a higher resolution type of grass than what I'm going to load right now, which is simple grass. If I load simple grass, that's going to be a much lower resolution, and for test purposes that might be what you want to start with. But it's just a really nice looking grass that I can load, and if I manipulate my view, you can see I have by default a square. I can change that again by going to this icon down here, grass cover parameters, then going to form, specifying the object import type, and now, since I already imported that terrain, I now have my grass, my simple grass, populated onto the terrain object that you see here. I select OK, and now I can save this. I can save this grass as either 3ds or an Onyx 3D. Now I want to save this as an Onyx 3D file, which leads me to the next discussion on Onyx to Max. This Onyx 3D file type here is only available when you have the Onyx to Max feature. The Onyx to Max feature is there solely for the purpose of allowing you to save and import Onyx 3ds files, or I should just say Onyx 3D files. The Onyx 3D file is it's saved with the Onyx file type, and which you'll see in just a minute. But before I see that, I have to actually make sure I have to accept these settings here. One of the most important of which is this unit, so I have to make sure this is set to inches. And I can do a polygon count to see what the polygon count of this object is. It is 64,000 polygons. I could use some of the features in here to change the complexity of the different elements of the grass so that it's fewer polygons. I want to save it just as is. It asks me, or it tells me not to give away or sell this file that I'm creating. This is called Simple Grass Cover. I click Save, and there it appears on my desktop right there. So now I can import this grass that I created in the modeler program and use it to populate the terrain that I created inside Max. So if I go to Import, notice that one of the file types is Onyx 3D, Onyx 3D Floor, which is the ONX file type. So I can select this ONX file type, this grass that I had created, and it says, do you want to convert units? Yes. So now I've just populated my terrain with this grass. And by the way, if you haven't started using Max 2012, you might want to get on that bandwagon, because I tell you, it has got some really cool display features, one of which is automatic shadows, ambient occlusion, and if you notice, you probably won't notice as much as me because of the speed at which you see your screen refresh, but you see shadows and ambient occlusion changing and improving over time. So it's almost like iRay or V-Ray RT. It's improving over time. And I also have these really cool stylized viewport things I can do, like for example graphite. If I want to display this grass as graphite or something else. I know this is not normally part of the class, but I just thought it was worth demonstrating because it does have some really cool features in here. Anyway, so these are different options, viewport options, but I'm going to just leave it on realistic. So here is my grass that I can now render. I don't have lighting and materials already set up, but I did create a quick setup for this. This is just an image that took me literally 1 minute to create. The materials are very simple. The lighting is very simple. I created this with V-Ray just to show you how simple this is and how little I did with this. Here is the file itself. And it has two materials, one on the ground object, which is nothing more than one solid color. And again, this is V-Ray. If you don't use V-Ray, that's fine. This is simply it's as simple as you can get. It's just a diffuse color. The grass itself is nothing more than a map applied to the diffuse channel, specifically a gradient map with 3 colors. And when I render that, I get this right here. So pretty nice looking stuff. And this is with the more complex grass that I mentioned before. This is not the simple grass. This is the more complex grass. There's 2 types of grass that you would want to use, the kind of grass that you would find on a lawn. There is grass true, which has several different examples or styles, and then you have grass simple down here, which is just a more simplistic version where instead of having pointed grass, you have more rectangular grass that has fewer polygons. All the other grass types are more specific types that wouldn't be necessarily on a lawn. They would be more for landscaping. So that is as much time as I can spend on the grass modeler. There's a lot of stuff to discuss here. I mean, you really have to get into it and play around with it to see everything that you can do. Again, don't forget those 4 images that display a reference of what all these different elements are. But for the most part, the interface itself is the same as any of the other modelers. You still have all the same features, just a few extras. Okay, so that is the grass feature. I want to go into one more modeler, the last modeler, which is the flower. And this is another great modeler here. This looks, again, fairly similar. Let's open up a template to get something started. By default, the flower library will have multiple folders that show you different types of flowers. For example, tulip, which is what I'm in right now. And these folders just have one file in them, so you can combine them into one folder if you wanted to. But I want to open up this tulip file, click the DNA button to basically refresh the display properly, and I can turn on and off all these different elements as I see fit, or I can leave them on. And again, just like the grass, they show you on the bottom left-hand corner what they represent. The older modelers do not do that, but that's fine. Once you learn these, you'll understand what they represent. This is an individual flower, obviously, but if I wanted to see a bed of flowers, I can click this Show Bed option. And now I'd have to rotate my view around to actually see what it is this bed looks like. And by default, this bed looks like a arc. It looks like a curved surface. And I can change that any way I want. I can go over to this icon down in the bottom right-hand corner called Bed Parameters, click on it, and then use these features here to change the length, width, and form of the bed. So if I wanted to change the length, just simply click length, drag up on this red section here, make it bigger or smaller, Let's set it right there. If I wanted to change the form and have it not be so arched, I can simply take the arching to 0, which will, once I refresh it with this DNA button, notice that it didn't refresh properly. So I can refresh it myself, make it populate, and there we go. The bed is starting to populate. I can do a lot of different things. I can even play around with the soil, the pebbles, the stuff that appears at the base of the flowers. There's a lot of really cool stuff. Unfortunately, I just don't have time to get into it, but there's a lot of great features here that you can look at. If I were to try to save this now, and I have to wait till it all displays because it's actually generating. If I try to save this too early, it won't save properly. File, save model as Onyx 3D. Now I have the same thing I always have before. Make sure you set the units. You can check the count to make sure that you don't have too many polygons. You can manipulate the complexity of some of the features, for example, the leaves. You can just simply turn off and on the display of these features. If I click Save, it will save this as a Onyx 3ds file or an Onyx 3D file. And that, for the most part, is Flower in a nutshell. Again, it's the same interface. It just has some different features that you would find that you would not find in other elements. I can even display a pot and have different looking pots to use for my flowers. There's just no limit to what I do here. Of course, you could argue that this is not the place that you should be doing pot modeling. There's obviously more power in other 3D software than this, but this is a nice, easy way to set up something very quick and easy if you have no need to do complex modeling inside your 3D software. Play around with this, and you'll learn what all these different icons represent. One more note about the Onyx to Max feature. I want to go back one more time into the grass program to hit on what this Onyx to Grass feature is. The Onyx to Grass feature is simply something that runs in the background that allows you to save models as the Onyx file type. If I open up this grass that we were using before, for example, this grass right here, I can click File, Save Model as Onyx 3D, do a quick polygon count, 145,000. I want to save this right to my desktop. And when I do, something special happens with this Onyx file that wouldn't happen with the 3ds file or any other file type you see listed here. With the Onyx file, you're able to save not only materials, but UVW coordinates, vertex color maps, all kinds of great stuff that you would see if you brought this into your 3D software. I want to delete this grass that I had here. I want to try to import this new grass that I just created. Right there, that's the grass that I just created. Hopefully I have it fairly decent size, and it looks pretty good here. Now inside Max, this is what it looks like. It looks like this in the viewport, but it would not look like this when rendered. If I zoom in really closely, notice what I was talking about before. The display of this improves over time, which is a really cool viewport feature, and that's really great. But I really am just trying to show what you get here when you import a Max file. I'm going to actually use the active shade mode inside V-Ray. This is set to V-Ray RT, so you're going to see this display rendering, and I'm going to stop talking because whenever we do these webinars, if the processors are going at full speed, 100%, it will make the sound quality very poor and you'll lose a lot of what I say. So I'm just going to hit this active shade to show you what this grass looks like, and you'll see all the textures and all the materials and UVW mapping look pretty good. This ground object is just set to a generic yellow or tan color, so I'm not really sure if this is going to look all that great, but concentrate on the grass here. And I'm just going to let this go and see what it looks like. So I just went ahead and stopped it. When I close the window inside V-Ray RT, it actually stops the processor. So now you should be able to hear my voice pretty good. But that was just to show you that when you use the Onyx, the Onyx file type, which is only possible with the Onyx to Max feature, you get the textures, the materials, everything applied automatically. So it's a beautiful, beautiful feature. Currently, the grass feature or the grass modeler is the only one that brings all this in. You would find some of these features with the other file types, like if you're trying to bring in flowers, you would see a lot of great stuff with flowers. All the modelers can export using the Onyx file type, but not all the modelers have the same capability as the grass feature. So play around with that with this Onyx file type. Just understand that only the grass feature is going to give you complete realism like this, and you will have to do some work in the other modelers when you import using the Onyx file type. I don't have too much time. I'm going to take 5 more minutes to show you just something really quick with materials on inside Max through the use of the Onyx modeler. I want to use the palm modeler for simplicity to demonstrate something with materials. I want to bring back the coconut palm that I was using before, right there, and I want to just take a really quick look at what I see if I zoom in really close here and look at this in shaded mode. So if you look at this closely, you see that there's no real complexity built into these leaves, right? But if I want to, I can do a lot of manipulation with the coloring of these leaves. I can do that inside. The modeler program by way of the different sections of the tree. For example, the leaf section here, I'm on the leaf. I can manipulate the color, and I can change the red, green, blue values for each part of the tree. For example, I'm on leaf right now. If I want to have a mixture of this color and this color, I can do that right here. So I can set the mixture with this middle icon here and have a mixture of these two colors, which is actually specified with these red, green, blue icons. So if I wanted to change this color here and make it darker green, I have to make sure that this red dot appears here as opposed to down here. If the red dot's down here, these colors are going to allow me to manipulate this color. But if I want to manipulate this color, I can do that right here. Let's just say for whatever reason I want to have a red leaf. So I can change my leaf to be completely red right there. And if I want to change these leaves to be blue for whatever reason, I can just manipulate these red, green, blue values so that some of my leaves will be red and some of my leaves will be blue. And why you would do this, I don't know, but I mean, you would never want to have a red and blue set of leaves like this, but the point is you can change the color however you want, and you can do it over a gradient too, so that you can have your leaves, instead of all of them being the solid red or solid blue, you can change them however you want. The point is you can use this vertex color or vertex shading inside the modeler. You can set it up inside the modeler, bring it into Max, and then have those colors through the vertex color map type. Use that to manipulate the look of your trees inside Max. And I want to show you that really quickly. I want to import the not import. I don't want to import any vegetation. I want to actually use the Onyx Storm feature to highlight what I'm getting at here. And the Onyx Storm feature is found under the Create Geometry drop-down list. You see Tree Storm right there. When I click on that tree storm, I have to click this button that allows me to open up the different parameters. And there's not a whole lot to this, which is one of the great things about Storm. It's so very simple. If I click this tree button, it allows me to select the tree type that I want to bring into Max as a parametric object, not as a not as an edit mesh, not as an edit poly, not as an Onyx file, not as a 3ds file, but rather a parametric object that Max can manipulate without having to store the geometry as an edit mesh or an edit poly would, which would of course require much greater file size. So if I bring in this coconut palm here, I just click inside my viewport, do a zoom extents. I see 3 preview modes. I see this canopy mode. I'm sorry, I actually forget what this mode is called. This is basically a very low resolution mode. This is the canopy mode, which would be great if you're trying to do renders of mass modeling. And then you have the full preview mode, the full shaded mode. And you see the polygon count here with this full shaded mode, 102,000. One of the great things about this particular feature is the wind feature, which you can enable by opening up wind, clicking active, and then adjusting the wind speed here. You have all different kinds of things that you can adjust, so that if you didn't want the trunk to move, for example, you can change that. If you wanted the leaves to move more or less, you can change that. You can have gusts blowing at a specific rate. But I just want to implement a little bit of wind here. So I hit OK, and now my leaves start to look like they're blowing in the wind. And if I press play, you would actually see, not so smoothly because you're watching this over a webinar, but you would see this clearly the tree is moving. So I'll go ahead and stop that. That's probably the best feature of this storm program. But besides that, there's another great feature which allows you to adjust the maps or materials that you place on these trees, and that's what I want to do right now. We were talking about materials just a minute ago, and I was talking about how I can use vertex color to manipulate the look of the vegetation, which is what I want to do right now. If I go into the polygon rollout and click adjust, here I've got this rollout that allows me to do something very specific. Again, you've got the complex and polygon feature. Notice that the leaflet is only available in the polygon mode, so just individual polygons will be used to display the leaves. Notice this UV column, which doesn't have any boxes enabled. I want to enable the leaflet box, so the UV column for leaflet, I want to enable that. When I do, that allows me to apply UVW map to this tree. If I hit OK, notice that the tree turns white. The tree turns white because it's expecting a map, a UVW map, to be applied to it. I want to take that off for just a moment and show how you can render this as is, just simply render it as is, which obviously has some sort of color gradient applied from the end of the leaf to the base of the leaf, and that is because it has the vertex color applied. So if I go into the material editor, pick this material off of the tree, notice that it comes in as a multi-sub-object material. So this object is comprised of many different elements and many different sub-materials. So notice if I scroll through here, sub-ID 1, 2, 3, trunk 1 is set to material ID number 2, trunk 2 is for 3. The leaf of this object, I believe, is 9. Yep, leaf number 1 is 9, and I can confirm what material goes to what part of the tree by doing something interesting. I can apply an edit mesh modifier to this object, or an edit poly. I can apply the edit mesh modifier, open up the polygon sub-object mode, click on any polygon, like for example this leaf here, click on the polygon, and then look at the material ID that's applied to that leaf. This material ID is 9, so all the leaves have this material ID number 9 set to it, which means when you're using this multi-sub-object material, submaterial number 9 is what's going to be used for the leaf. If I go into this sub-object material, you see that I'm inside this multi-sub-object material. I'm inside the leaf. If I go into the diffuse color channel, notice that I have a vertex color. That vertex color allows me to manipulate the look of the leaves by changing the vertex color. And I can change the vertex color in the Edit Mesh or Edit Poly modifier by selecting Vertex clicking on any vertex, and when I do, you see that the vertex color changes depending on which vertex I select. Depending on how this tree was created inside your modeler program or how you manipulate it, which you can certainly do. I showed you a moment ago how you can change the color inside the modeler program. Depending on what colors you have selected, it will display those colors here inside Max. Notice that if I click the very end of a leaf, it shows me this color here and that same color on all the ends of the leaves. I could do a lot with this. If I wanted to, if I selected a group of vertices and just changed the color to something like red, notice that it actually changes the look of this leaf to that red color. And I can do that to create any number of looks I want. If I select one vertex that has the color that I want to manipulate, I can drag this color swatch from right where it is right now to the Select Vertices by color swatch, drag it right down here, and then create a copy so that I can select vertices that have this exact color that I just copied over. So if I click Select, notice that all the vertices that have this color that I dragged into this color swatch here now get selected. And once I do that, all kinds of things open up. I can do all sorts of things. For example, soft selection. I can use the soft selection to manipulate the look, or I can actually move these vertices around if I wanted to. I can move all these vertices around using soft selection. Or I can apply a lot of different unique material features to this according to this vertex by color map type over here. But the bottom line is I've got certain vertex selected. I can change the look of those vertices through the Edit Vertex Color selection. Let's say I wanted blue leaves for some reason. I've just changed multiple leaves so they all have this little blue highlight at the very end. And the last thing I'm going to show is instead of using this vertex color feature, I can just go out of this edit mesh or delete this edit mesh modifier that I had, click on adjust again, and then re-enable this UVW option here that again turns my tree white because it's expecting a map applied to it. So I need to apply a map to this material channel 9. I go into this material channel 9 and I want to apply a diffuse map to this. So I go into bitmap and I've got a material already set for this. Let's choose this leaf right here, leaf 2. And if I render this, I believe if I render this right now, it should be pretty good to go. There it goes. So I've got this map already applied to this. I can adjust the tiling however I want. I can open this up a little bit better to see how this is applied. But if I wanted to spread the tiling, let's zoom in a little bit closer. If I wanted to spread the tiling out, I can do that here. Render again. And I can see some, I can manipulate the leaves however I want using the tiling feature inside the diffuse color channel or for whatever map that I have applied to this. So there's just so much power that you can have with this that's available with this. Unfortunately, again, I was only able to scratch the surface of this. There's so much more to learn. There's so much more to cover. One thing I would like to say is I've heard and seen a lot of people on forums talk about the interface of this program, of these modelers. Don't concentrate on the interface so much as what they can do, because there is a lot of power to this. There's a lot of things you can do this. I mean, just something as simple as cutting that tree off like that. That's pretty cool. It doesn't matter if the display or refreshing capabilities is not what you're used to in Max or whatever software you use. Concentrate on the power that's available. As long as you learn the features, you'll have a lot of power available to you. So with that, I will entertain some questions in just a moment. Let me wrap this up by saying thank you for watching, and hope to see you around again in the future. If you have some questions, I will take them at this time. I will turn on the option for questions, So stand by for 1 second. You can raise your hand. You can ask your questions. There should be a question dialog box that opened up in your interface if you want to ask some questions at this time. I can either unmute your microphone if you raise your hand, or I can entertain some questions. So let's see what we have here. Just maneuvering around the interface, so just bear with me 1 moment. It's hard to work in a such a small interface. Someone is asking, how can I reduce huge polygon counts? Is there bushes or shrubs? Okay, how do I reduce polygon count? Good question. The reduced polygon count is what you would find. Let me reopen this file here. Doesn't matter what we pick here. So here's another type of palm tree. If I want to reduce the polygon count, I can do that with each individual object. I can go down to the trunk curving like I showed before and change the resolution of the trunk so that it has fewer polygons. I can do that within the actual modeling features here, or I can go into Save Model as 3ds and use this Minimize button to change the count from what it is by default, in this case 62,000 to 22,000. And I can manipulate these features here to change it even more. Okay, if I want to increase the percentage of polygons based on the initial amount, I can do that. I can also, again, go from complex to polygon. If I wanted to show the trunk in terms of polygons rather than complex, instead of having full 3D complexity, I can just use a simple plane to represent the trunk. I can do that here and then save it out. Somebody else asked a question, are there bushes or shrubs? Yes. When I started this, I mentioned that I changed the folder structure of my Onyx program. Within the broadleaf folder, you would find a bush folder. Again, by default, you would get a folder configuration that's more in line with what you see here, Onyx Garden Suite. If I go into Onyx Tree Broadleaf, Onyx Tree Broadleaf again, I see all these different folders. I've deleted the Romulus, the Fantastic Trees, the Aquatic Series. I don't need any of those. I've left the Broadleaf and Bush. But yes, there is a bush library. If you go into Bush, you see all these beautiful bushes that you can manipulate. They don't look all that great as bitmaps, as low-resolution bitmaps, but when you bring them into Max, they really do look so much better, and especially when you apply materials to them. Just remember that the vegetation is only going to look as good as the materials and the lighting that you have. So these preview bitmaps are not supposed to indicate what you are capable of creating. Somebody is asking, is the storm feature available with Cinema 4D? I wish I knew that. I don't know that because I don't use Cinema 4D. The owners of Onyx, a simple email to the owners of Onyx could clear that up. They're available anytime. You can call them anytime. Their phone number is right on their website. Here's their website. You go down to the contact page. Here's how you can contact them, and they could answer that question for you. Can you save a model in standalone to use in library for tree storm? Can you save a model in standalone to use in library for tree storm? Yes, that's what I was doing. You know, if I save this out right now, let's refresh this. If I save this, I can save it as a 3ds file or an Onyx 3D file. The only difference is the Onyx 3D file has a lot more. It brings a lot more with it. It keeps a lot of the mapping and the vertex colors, the materials that you create inside the modeler program. And again, remember that the grass is the most sophisticated version of that. But if I save this out as a model, I can then bring it into Max through the storm feature. So any Onyx file, any file that is used in any of the modelers, for example, the broadleaf, conifer, palm, and even the old versions of Onyx tree, which is the TR5 and the TRE file. Any of these files can be used inside Storm to create a parametric vegetation object. Are the leaf textures you mapped to the tree part of the program? Are the leaf textures you mapped part of the tree program? No. I have a large series of maps to use in vegetation. I've only got a very small folder for demonstration purposes here in case I needed something for display. In this folder you see just a few things, but I have a folder with thousands of different leaves and thousands of different textures to use for any circumstance that I want. It's not something that comes with Max unless some of the modelers, again, like the grass, does bring that in. Flower does have some materials automatically that it can bring along with it. But things like the bamboo, the palm, conifer, those don't bring in maps in any respect. I should say bitmaps. They don't bring in bitmaps, but they do allow you to bring in other type of maps. How does Onyx handle large amounts of trees in your scene? I mean, as far as memory limits, keeping them unique, rendering them, etc. Have you noticed any issues with having fields of trees and grass? Yes. You got to be very careful bringing in fields of trees, fields of grass. You got to make sure that you get your units right and don't screw that up, because you could end up bringing in an enormous amount of grass or an enormous amount of trees when you meant to bring in just a few for an area that you define. Obviously, in any 3D software, the more polygons you have, the greater render time, the longer it takes to refresh your display. So you have to be cognizant of what you create in your modeling program. You can manipulate that in Storm. If you bring in your files into Storm, you do have those features I showed you where you can change from having complex structures to polygon structures. You can change the polygon count. You can use the minimize feature to change the complexity of it. But of course, you start to get into millions of polygons in your scene, and then you really start to slow your scene down. There is no right or wrong answers to what polygon count is the maximum you should use. It all depends on the amount of RAM you have in your processing power. I have 12 gigabytes of RAM on this machine, so I can bring in a lot of polygons. And if you use proxies, mental array proxies or V-ray proxies, you can literally have billions and billions of polygons in an entire forest of trees. But it's still going to take you forever to render. Having proxies combined with a 64-bit processor or a 64-bit machine makes it a lot easier to work in very, very large scenes. But it's not going to make your scenes magically just render faster. So yeah, you have to be very aware of how much detail you put into your trees. Is Tree Storm the process to populate large amounts of trees and grass? You can use Tree Storm to do it. You can use you can use the features inside the modeling programs to do it. You can I showed how you can create a field of grass, a field of bushes. You can do it in the modeling programs. You can do it inside Max. One thing to remember, though, when you use Storm, when you're using Storm, the object is parametric. So literally right now, if I do sorry about that, I'm trying to close this dialog box that just opened up. If I do a polygon count in this scene right now, it says 120,000 polygons. But these polygons, or I should say the vertices are not stored like an edit mesh or an edit poly. If I save this file, it's going to be a very, very small file. If I do a save as, let's save this as tree, and then look at the file size. The file size of this should be very small. 300 kilobytes, barely more than an empty scene. And the reason why is because the display of this tree is dictated solely by parameters, and those parameters are there aren't many parameters to begin with. You can't change the size of the trunk. There's nothing. You don't have the same parameters inside Storm like you did inside the modeling programs. Once you bring it into Storm, it's assumed that you've got the modeling done, which is why these are called modeling programs. You do your modeling in your modeling programs, bring them into Storm, and then you can manipulate a few things like wind or the UVW mapping of this. But this object brought in through Storm is now a parametric object, so it's very, very small polygon size. The moment I turn this into an edit mesh or an edit poly, it's no longer going to be a small file. So if I go back to save and look at this again, same number of vertices, same polygon count, everything's the same, but now the tree is probably going to be, if I refresh this, should be a lot larger. I'm not sure why this is not showing, but this is a lot larger than 300 kilobytes. Let's look at this through Max, see what it says. 9.7 megabytes. I don't know why I wasn't refreshing the display inside the desktop, but now that same tree is 9.7 megabytes as opposed to 300 kilobytes. So I did a class last month on system resource management. That in that class I talk about at great length, when do you collapse, when do you create instances, when do you create proxies, when do you do all these things that allow you to handle enormous large scenes, which trees will certainly create. I've worked in many scenes where just a few trees have more polygons than the entire building that the trees are surrounding. So you have to be very careful with trees or vegetation of any kind. Onyx tree seems joined at the hip with Max, but I use Maya. Do I lose anything in Onyx model when I import into Maya? Can I import animation from Onyx tree into Maya? Can I easily substitute the wireframes I put in Maya as place? I wish I knew the answer. I just don't use Maya. I would be very surprised if you do not have a lot of the same complexity or the same capability inside Maya as you do Max. The Onyx to Max feature is, of course, specifically for Max. So the Onyx files, I don't know if you will even have the ability to create and use Onyx files, but everything else should be the same. The Onyx Storm should be the same. Would it render faster and easier for PC as parametric object than a polymesh object? Great question. I talked about this in the last class last month. Would it render faster and easier as a parametric object rather than a polymesh object? Yes and no. It will render faster only if you run out of RAM. If you do not run out of RAM, the number the structure of your object, whether it's a edit mesh, an edit poly, or a parametric object like this, will have absolutely no bearing on the render speed. The only thing that affects render speed is, I shouldn't say the only, the thing that affects it the most is the polygon count. In terms of file size, that is governed by the vertex count. So, the polygon count, which this is the polygon counter, but in actuality it should be called a face counter because this really doesn't say the number of polygons, it's really the number of faces. If I have, a million faces, regardless of how many polygons I have or regardless of what that object type is, I got a million faces, and it's going to take it some time to render those million faces, regardless of whether that tree is displayed as a parametric object or an edit mesh. So in terms of render time, face count, or you call it polygon count, but that's not really the best way to say it. Face count is king, vertex count is king when it comes to file size. Remember, I could have a huge train feature with millions of faces comprised of one polygon. So the polygon count is not truly what dictates render time. It's the face count. Just a couple more questions here. Thank you. Where can I download Onyx? It's not free, so you have to go to the Onyx website here, onyxtree.com. You can purchase it right here automatically. If you do it during U.S. business hours, you get it same day in most cases, but unfortunately it's not free. What is the advantage of saving 3ds versus Onyx, Option, and Palm? I honestly don't think there are any benefits to that other than it even tells you right here, Onyx to Storm. What is the Onyx file? As it says right here, Onyx gives you the ability to carry 3D geometry, mapping coordinates, color per vertex, material data including textures. And here's another thing. The Onyx file type allows you to save an object as one object as opposed to multiple objects if you exceed that 64,000 kilobyte, 64,000 vertex limit that you get with 3ds files. 3ds files only allow you to save 64,000 faces, and as it says here, will result in a number of split submaterials. So if you were to take a big palm tree that's 1,000,000 polygons and save it as a 3ds file, that file would be comprised of dozens of objects and dozens of submaterials. So that alone makes the Onyx file type worthwhile. So you don't have to worry about having just a crazy object or crazy scene of objects just for one tree. Some other things here, as it says, as I mentioned, the grass is currently the only format that allows you to take full advantage of color per vertex and some of the other features like textures and materials. I'll do one more question. How do I replace leaves of my tree in Max with some custom geometry? How do I replace leaves of my tree in Max with some custom geometry? That is a great question, and that's one of those things that I've used Onyx for a long time, and I consider myself pretty good at it. It's one of those things that unless you do on a regular basis, you probably will forget, like me, but I know it's possible. Let's see if I can just quickly jar my memory. If I go into, let's load just a simple tree and go to the leaves, leaf type. Here we have different leaf types. If I zoom in really closely, you'll see that I can change the look of my leaves however I want. And there is a way to have a custom leaf type here, I believe. Actually, it might not be the case. You might be limited to just this and the leaf structure that you can, or the look of the leaf that you can generate through UVW mapping. You know, I can have this leaf type right there and apply a map to this. So instead of looking just exactly like this, it will look like whatever is on the map. I believe this is the case. So if you're going to have a particular type of leaf, you should pick one of these types that gives you the closest look to the leaf that you're going to apply. You know, you don't want to apply a round leaf to a very long, slender leaf model. You would want to use something more like this type of leaf. So I'm pretty sure that's the case. Otherwise, you would see something here that indicates that you can create the exact leaf type or leaf structure that you want. But that's all the time that I have to entertain questions. Let me close again by saying really appreciate you for watching. That concludes this class on Onyx Vegetation. Hope that you join us again sometime in the future for more classes. For more free training, visit thecgschool.com, and hope to see you again in the future.